Sometimes a man reaches a point where he has to leave everything behind just to find himself again. For 52-year-old Sterling Wade, that moment came after a divorce that shattered him and decades of working jobs that slowly drained his soul. He bought a weathered ranch in Montana with his last savings, hoping the quiet would help him heal. The neighbors laughed at the tired man with no plan and a falling-apart barn. But inside that barn, Sterling found a 1951 Chevy pickup that belonged to his grandfather. Hidden in the glove box was a journal filled with confessions from the Dust Bowl years. Could fixing an old truck fix what was broken inside him? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel driveway stretched nearly a quarter-mile from the main road, lined on both sides with cottonwood trees that had seen better decades. The bark was weathered and split, branches reaching toward each other overhead like arthritic fingers trying to touch. Sterling Wade drove slowly, his aging sedan rattling over potholes he'd need to fill eventually. Through the dust kicked up by his tires, the ranch house materialized like something out of a faded photograph. It wasn't much to look at. The white paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing gray wood underneath that had been baking in Montana sun for who knew how many summers. The front porch sagged slightly on the left side, and several spindles in the railing were missing entirely. But the roof looked intact, the windows unbroken, and the stone chimney stood straight and solid. Sterling had seen the inspection report. The bones were good, the realtor had assured him. Everything else was just cosmetic. He pulled to a stop in front of the house and turned off the engine. The silence hit him immediately. No traffic sounds, no sirens, no voices from neighboring apartments bleeding through thin walls. Just wind moving through prairie grass and the distant call of a hawk circling somewhere over the eastern ridge. He sat there for a long moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Behind him, in the trunk and back seat, were 2 suitcases containing most of his remaining possessions. 28 years of marriage, a 3-bedroom house in the Chicago suburbs, an office job with decent benefits. All of it had condensed down to what could fit in a mid-sized sedan. The rest had been divided, sold, or abandoned. Judith got the house in the settlement. He couldn't have afforded it alone anyway, not after she'd asked him to leave. "You're already gone, Sterling," she'd said during their last real conversation, the one where divorce stopped being a possibility and became inevitable. "You've been gone for years. You just keep showing up to sleep here." She wasn't wrong. He'd been checked out long before either of them admitted it. The job had done that, slowly, the way water wears down stone, adjusting insurance claims, denying coverage based on fine print, defending the company's bottom line while families struggled with medical bills or fire damage or flood losses. Year after year, the work had hollowed him out. He'd become efficient at saying no, at finding reasons why someone's suffering wasn't quite covered by their policy. He'd stopped seeing people and started seeing case numbers. Holly had noticed too. His daughter, 26 now and living in Seattle, working in graphic design and building a life that didn't include much contact with her father. She'd been 17 when she first said something, home from a friend's house and finding him in his study, working on a weekend like always. "Do you even like us anymore?" she'd asked. He'd looked up from his laptop, confused. "What? Mom and me, do you like us? Because you never seem happy to be around us. I'm just busy, sweetheart. Work is always something," she'd said. "But you're never here." Not really. That had been 9 years ago. The distance between them had only grown since. She'd called twice after the divorce was finalized, checking if he was okay in that careful way that told him she'd expected him to fall apart. Maybe he had, just not in ways she could see over the phone. Sterling climbed out of the car and stretched. His back complained immediately, stiff from the 14-hour drive from Chicago. He was 52, and lately his body seemed determined to remind him of that fact at every opportunity. His knees creaked when he bent down to pick up his duffel bag. His shoulder ached when he lifted the suitcase from the trunk. The key to the house was under a rock beside the front steps, exactly where the realtor said it would be. The lock was stiff, but it turned eventually, and the door swung inward with a groan of hinges that probably hadn't been oiled since the previous owner died. That owner had been his grandmother, though Sterling had only learned this detail 3 months ago when her estate lawyer tracked him down. Apparently, she'd inherited the property from her father, Sterling's great-grandfather, and had held onto it for decades without ever visiting or renting it out. Just paid the property taxes every year and let it sit empty. When she died at 93 in a nursing home in Wyoming, the ranch passed to Sterling's mother, who had died 2 years earlier, which meant it passed to Sterling. "I don't understand," he'd told the lawyer on the phone. "Why wouldn't she sell it?" "Some people can't let go of the past," the lawyer had said, "even when the past is just empty buildings on empty land." Now, standing in the dusty living room, Sterling understood a little better. This place held something. He could feel it in the stillness, in the way afternoon light fell through the windows at an angle that suggested countless other afternoons just like this one. Someone had lived here. Someone had built a life in these rooms. The furniture was minimal. A couch with springs poking through worn cushions, a table with 3 mismatched chairs, a bookshelf holding yellowed paperbacks and old almanacs. The kitchen still had dishes in the cabinets, though they were covered in a layer of dust thick enough to write his name in. The refrigerator stood empty and unplugged, door propped open to prevent mold. He climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor and found 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with fixtures that probably dated to the 1950s. The smaller bedroom held only a metal bed frame with no mattress. The larger one had a full mattress that Sterling wouldn't trust to support his weight without serious inspection. He'd be sleeping in his sleeping bag on the floor until he could get something better. From the upstairs window he could see most of the property. 78 acres according to the deed. Flat grassland mostly, with gentle rises toward the mountains visible in the distance. A few stands of trees marked where water probably collected. The fence line was visible in places, posts leaning at angles or missing entirely. And dominating the view, just 50 yards from the house, stood the barn. It was bigger than he'd expected from the photos. 2 stories of weathered wood, the roof sagging in the middle but not yet collapsed. The large double doors at the front were closed, held shut by a rusted chain and padlock. Several smaller windows along the sides were broken or missing entirely. The whole structure leaned slightly to the north, as if tired and ready to lie down, but not quite ready to give up. Sterling stared at it for a long time. Something about that barn called to him in a way he couldn't quite name. It felt important somehow, like it contained answers to questions he hadn't yet learned to ask. He spent the rest of the afternoon unloading his car and setting up a basic camp in the living room. His sleeping bag went on the floor near the window where he could catch whatever breeze came through. His few books stacked on the mantel above the cold fireplace. His toiletries arranged in the bathroom. His clothes stayed in the suitcases, since there were no working drawers or closet space he trusted. As evening approached, Sterling heard the sound of a truck coming up the driveway. He went to the porch and watched as a Ford pickup, 20 years old but well-maintained, pulled to a stop beside his sedan. An elderly man climbed out from the driver's side, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints didn't bend quite right anymore. From the passenger side emerged a woman about the same age, holding a covered dish. "Evening," the man called out, raising a hand in greeting. His face was deeply tanned and creased with lines that spoke of decades working outdoors. "Saw someone had finally come up to the old Wade place. Figured we'd introduce ourselves. I'm Virgil Danes. This is my wife, Ruth." "Sterling Wade," he replied, coming down the steps to meet them. "Wade?" Virgil's eyebrows rose. "You related to Harold, then?" "He was my grandfather, though I never knew him. He died before I was born." Ruth stepped forward, offering the dish. "Well then, welcome home. I know it doesn't look like much right now, but this was a good place once. Could be again, with some work." The dish was a casserole, still warm, and Sterling realized he hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. "Thank you." "That's very kind. City folk usually don't last long out here," Virgil said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than unkind. especially alone. Gets quiet, gets lonely. Winter can be hard if you're not prepared. I'm prepared for quiet, Sterling said. It's what I came here for. 3 days of hard physical labor had stripped away some of the softness Sterling had accumulated behind his desk. His hands, once smooth and pale, now bore blisters and a layer of honest dirt that seemed to settle into every crease and callus. The barn had become his entire world, a project large enough to occupy both his body and his restless mind. He'd started methodically, the way he approached everything. The front section first, near the doors where light penetrated deepest. Old horsetack hung from nails driven into support beams, bridles with cracked leather, saddles with stuffing spilling from torn seams, halters that might have been red once but had faded to a dull pink. He took each piece down carefully, examining it for any salvageable value before sorting it into piles. Keep, donate, or scrap. The work felt good in ways he hadn't anticipated. His muscles ached, yes, but it was clean pain, the kind that came from actual use, rather than tension and stress. Sweat soaked through his shirt by mid-morning, and he found himself stripping down to his undershirt, something he'd never have done in the climate-controlled monotony of his office. The sun through the barn's broken windows warmed his shoulders. Dust made him sneeze. He felt present in his body for the first time in years. By the 3rd day, he'd worked his way to the back corner of the barn, where the shadows were thickest and the accumulation of forgotten decades lay heaviest. A stack of hay bales had rotted into compressed blocks of moldy straw. As he wrestled with them, trying to break them apart for disposal, one section shifted and revealed something behind it. Chrome. Just a glint of it, catching the light, but unmistakable. Sterling's heart rate picked up. He attacked the hay bales with renewed energy, pulling them away piece by piece, scattering decades-old straw across the barn floor. More chrome appeared, then a curve of metal, then a tarp. Heavy canvas, weathered to the color of old parchment, covered whatever lay beneath. Sterling grabbed the edge and pulled. The fabric resisted at first, stuck to itself and to the object it protected, but then it came free all at once in a cloud of dust that made him cough and step back. When the air cleared, Sterling stood staring at a 1951 Chevy pickup truck. It was beautiful, even in neglect. The body was turquoise, or had been once. Now the paint was faded, oxidized to a chalky finish, with rust bubbling through in spots along the fenders and door edges. But the overall shape remained intact, the classic lines of post-war American optimism rendered in steel and chrome. The front grille still held most of its teeth. The headlights, though clouded with age, remained unbroken in their housings. Sterling walked around it slowly, his hand trailing along the body, leaving clean streaks in the dust. The tires were flat, the rubber cracked, but not completely rotted. Through the windows, he could see the bench seat, upholstery torn in places, but still recognizably original. The steering wheel was the wide, thin type from that era, and hanging from the rearview mirror was a pair of fuzzy dice, their white surfaces turned yellow with time. He tried the driver's door. The handle resisted, then gave way with a metallic groan. The hinges shrieked as the door swung open, loud in the barn's stillness. Sterling slid into the seat, springs protesting beneath his weight, and wrapped his hands around the steering wheel. This was his grandfather's truck. Had to be. The license plate, visible now that he looked for it, read Montana, 1951. Harold Wade had driven this vehicle, had sat in this exact seat, hands on this exact wheel, looking through this same windshield at whatever future he imagined for himself. Sterling had never known Harold. The man died 3 years before Sterling was born, a heart attack at 59, while mending fence on this very property. His mother had rarely spoken of her father, and when she did, it was always with a strange mixture of anger and sadness that Sterling had never fully understood. He knew the basics. Harold had moved to Montana from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, bought this land, built this ranch. Beyond that, the man was essentially a stranger. But sitting in his grandfather's truck, Sterling felt an unexpected connection. Something about the worn steering wheel, the way the seat had conformed to someone else's body. The view through the windshield of barn walls that had stood here for 70 years. It all spoke of continuity, of lives touching across time, even when the people themselves never met. The glove box latch was stiff, painted over at some point, but Sterling worked at it until it gave way with a click. The small door fell open, and inside he found the expected items. An owner's manual, brittle with age. Registration papers made out to Harold Wade, dated 1951. A folded map of Montana with routes marked in faded pencil. And underneath it all, a leather-bound journal. Sterling lifted it out carefully. The leather was soft from age, the binding loose but intact. Embossed on the cover in gold lettering, now mostly worn away, was a name, Harold Wade. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The first page was dated April 7th, 1934. "The dust came again today," the entry began, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Darker than yesterday, thick enough to choke a man. Covered everything. The fields, the house, our bedding, our food." Mary coughed all night. "The baby inside her must be swimming in dust by now. I wonder if it will be born knowing what clean air feels like." Sterling read on, unable to stop. Entry after entry chronicled Harold's life during the Dust Bowl years. The loss of his family's farm in Oklahoma. The desperate decision to leave, to head north and west toward land he'd never seen. The fear of failing, of not being able to provide. The determination to build something that would last. "We arrived in Montana today," read an entry from July 1934. "Got my first look at the land I bought sight unseen with borrowed money. Mary cried when she saw it. Not sure if it was relief or disappointment. The mountains in the distance make me feel small, but the soil is dark and rich. Water runs clean from the creek. I can build something here. I have to." The entries continued through the years. Building the house, then the barn. The birth of his daughter in 1935, Sterling's mother. Early struggles with drought, with learning to ranch in unfamiliar country, with isolation and loneliness. But also small victories. The first successful harvest. Neighbors helping raise the barn walls. The purchase of their first cattle. Sterling lost track of time, sitting in that dusty truck, reading his grandfather's private thoughts. The afternoon light shifted, growing golden as it angled lower through the barn windows. His back protested the awkward position, but he barely noticed. The later entries showed a man finding his footing. Harold's voice in the journal became more confident, less desperate. He wrote about teaching himself mechanics, about helping neighbors fix equipment when they couldn't afford professionals. "A man who can fix things will never go hungry," he wrote. "Skills matter more than money out here." There were entries about his daughter growing up, about worries and pride mixed together, about his wife's health declining and the fear of losing her, about the slow, steady work of building a life that meant something. The last entry Sterling read before the light grew too dim was from 1950. "Bought a new truck today. The old Ford finally gave up. This Chevy cost more than I wanted to spend, but Mary says we've earned something nice." She's right. 20 years we've been on this land. It's ours now, truly ours. The bank doesn't own it anymore. This place will stand long after we're gone. That matters. Sterling closed the journal carefully and sat in the growing darkness of the barn. Outside, he could hear evening birds beginning their calls. The truck around him felt less like a relic and more like a time machine, connecting him to a man he'd never met but suddenly desperately wanted to know. He understood now what he needed to do. This truck, his grandfather's truck, could run again. It would take work, months of it probably, but Sterling had nothing but time. And somewhere in the process of restoring this machine, maybe he could restore something in himself too. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Both he and this truck had been abandoned, left to decay in silence. Both were worn down by neglect and time, but neither was beyond repair, not yet. Sterling climbed out of the truck and stood looking at it in the dim light. Tomorrow, he'd start researching restoration techniques. He'd order manuals, watch videos, learn what he needed to learn. He'd take this project step by step, the same way Harold had built this ranch, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. For the first time since leaving Chicago, Sterling felt something other than emptiness. It wasn't quite hope, not yet. But it was direction, purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. He ran his hand along the truck's fender one more time before heading back to the house, the journal tucked carefully under his arm. Behind him, the barn settled into night, and the truck waited patiently, as it had waited for decades for someone to bring it back to life. The restoration manuals arrived 6 days later, delivered by a postal carrier who seemed surprised anyone was living at the old Wade place. Sterling tore open the packages on the porch and spent the rest of the afternoon reading, making notes, trying to understand the enormity of what he'd committed to doing. A 1951 Chevy pickup wasn't a simple machine by modern standards, but it wasn't impossibly complex either. The engine was an inline-six, straightforward in design, with no computers or sensors to diagnose. The electrical system was basic, the suspension primitive by today's standards. In theory, a determined amateur could restore one with patience and the right tools. Theory, Sterling was discovering, looked very different from practice. He'd set up internet service in the house the day before, reluctantly. Part of him had wanted to stay disconnected, to embrace the isolation completely. But he needed access to parts suppliers, forums, video tutorials. The modern world, it turned out, was necessary even when trying to resurrect something from 70 years ago. His first actual attempt at mechanical work came on day 8. He'd spent the previous days cleaning the truck more thoroughly, removing decades of accumulated grime, documenting every detail with photos. Now armed with a socket set purchased in town and a printed guide to engine basics, he decided to start with something simple, draining the old fuel. The gas tank was under the truck bed, accessible from beneath. Sterling slid under the chassis on a piece of cardboard, flashlight in one hand, wrench in the other. The drain plug fought him. Years of rust had essentially welded it in place. He strained, putting his full strength into it, until the wrench slipped and his knuckles slammed into the frame. "Damn it," he muttered, sliding back out to examine his bleeding hand. Virgil, who had appeared without announcement as he tended to do, stood watching with his arms crossed. "Trying to force it? It won't budge." "Course it won't, not like that." Virgil walked over and squatted down with a grunt. "You got penetrating oil?" Sterling admitted he didn't. "Go to town. Get yourself some WD-40, or better yet PB Blaster. Spray it. Let it sit overnight. Sometimes you got to give things time to loosen up before they'll cooperate." It was a simple lesson, but Sterling felt foolish for not knowing it. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "Nobody does it first," Virgil replied. Harold didn't either. Taught himself mechanics during the Depression because he couldn't afford to pay anyone else. Read books, made mistakes, learned from them. That's how it works. After Virgil left, Sterling drove to town and bought the penetrating oil, along with several other items the hardware store owner suggested. The man, elderly and patient, seemed to recognize something in Sterling, a city person trying to learn country skills, and took the time to explain the basics of working with old metal, seized bolts, and the importance of not forcing things. "You break it, you bought yourself a bigger problem," he said. "Patience is cheaper than replacement parts." That evening, Sterling read more of Harold's journal by lamplight. He'd reached entries from the late 1940s now, and the tone had shifted. The desperate struggle of the early years had given way to something steadier, though still far from easy. "Fixed Virgil's tractor today," read one entry from 1948. "Carburetor was gummed up. Simple enough fix once you know what you're looking for. He offered to pay, but I said no. Out here you help each other. The help always comes back around when you need it." So Virgil and Harold had known each other. Virgil would have been in his 20s then, probably just starting his own ranch. The continuity of it struck Sterling. The same people, the same land, the same struggles and solutions passed down through generations. He was stepping into a story that had been unfolding for decades before his arrival. The next morning, the penetrating oil had done its work. The drain plug turned with reasonable effort, and Sterling successfully drained the old fuel into a pan. The gasoline had broken down into a thick, varnish-like substance that smelled terrible, but at least it was out. Small victory. He moved on to the spark plugs next, armed with a YouTube video he'd watched 3 times. Removing them proved easier than expected. They were corroded, yes, but not seized. He laid them out on his workbench in order, examining each one. The electrodes were worn but not destroyed. With cleaning and regapping, they might still be usable. The work became a rhythm. Research a task, gather the necessary tools, attempt it, make mistakes, learn, try again. Some days he accomplished a lot. Other days, a single stubborn bolt would consume hours. But slowly, methodically, the truck began to reveal itself to him. He discovered Harold's handwriting again, this time on a small piece of masking tape stuck to the air filter housing, cleaned AUG 1951. Other notes appeared as he worked, timing marks highlighted in faded paint, adjustment specifications written on the firewall. A map of the ignition timing taped inside the glove box. His grandfather had been meticulous. Every modification, every adjustment carefully documented. Sterling found himself following Harold's notes like breadcrumbs through time, learning not just about the truck, but about the man who'd maintained it. 3 weeks in, Holly called. "Dad," her voice carried concern. "You okay?" "You haven't posted anything on social media in forever." "I deleted those accounts," he said. "Don't need them out here." Silence on the line. "Then are you sure you're okay?" "This whole thing, moving to the middle of nowhere, isolating yourself." "I'm not isolating. I'm working on something." He told her about the truck, about the journal, about his grandfather. She listened with what he recognized as professional patience, the voice she probably used with difficult clients. "Dad, you don't know anything about trucks." The words stung because they were true. "I'm learning." "By yourself? In a barn in Montana?" "People used to learn things without YouTube and online forums, Holly. They figured it out." Another silence. Then softer, "I just don't want you to be alone with nothing but a broken-down truck and old journals." "That sounds really depressing." "It's not depressing," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It's purposeful. There's a difference." "If you say so." She paused. "Maybe I could visit sometime. See this place." The offer surprised him. "You'd want to." "I don't know, maybe, if you actually want me to come." "Of course I do." "Okay, let me look at my schedule. Maybe next month or something." After she hung up, Sterling sat on the porch with the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of that conversation. His daughter thought he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe she was right. He'd left his entire life behind to restore a truck he didn't know how to restore, in a place where he knew no one, chasing a connection to a man who'd been dead for 50 years. But it didn't feel like a breakdown. It felt like the opposite, like he was finally breaking through something. That afternoon, he managed to remove the carburetor. It was a delicate operation, disconnecting fuel lines and linkages, keeping track of small springs and screws. The video he'd watched made it look straightforward, but his hands shook with nervousness the entire time. When he finally lifted it free, carburetor intact in his hands, he felt a rush of accomplishment disproportionate to the task. It was just one component. The truck still didn't run. There were hundreds of hours of work ahead. But he'd done something, understood something, taken a real step forward. He carried the carburetor inside and set it on the kitchen table, then spent the evening disassembling it, cleaning each part with solvent, examining the tiny passages where fuel and air mixed. The precision required focused his mind completely. For those hours, nothing existed except the task in front of him. When he finally reassembled it near midnight, every part cleaned and back in place, Sterling felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but satisfaction. The clean, honest feeling of having accomplished something with his own hands. He called Virgil the next morning to share the news. The old rancher listened, then said, "Good, you're learning patience. That's the first thing anyone needs to learn about fixing old machines. They don't run on your schedule. They run on theirs." "Harold wrote something similar in his journal," Sterling said. "Harold was a smart man," Virgil replied. "Stubborn as hell, but smart." "You're like him in some ways." Sterling didn't know if that was a compliment or a warning. Maybe it was both. Week 3 brought a cold snap that reminded Sterling he'd moved to Montana. Frost covered the grass each morning, and his breath misted in the unheated barn. He worked in layers, flannel shirt, thick vest, wool hat, and kept a thermos of coffee within reach. The cold made his fingers stiff, made working with small parts more difficult, but he didn't mind. There was something honest about it, about working in conditions that made demands on your body. He'd progressed to the fuel system now, replacing brittle rubber lines with new ones, cleaning the fuel pump, checking the tank for rust. The work was tedious but necessary. Every component had to be addressed, inspected, either restored or replaced. There were no shortcuts, no way to skip the difficult parts. In the evenings, after his hands were too cold or too tired to work anymore, Sterling continued reading Harold's journal. He'd reached the late 1940s now, and the entries had taken on a different tone. The desperate edge of the early years had softened, but something else had crept in, a weariness that Sterling recognized. 3 years of drought, Harold wrote in 1947, cattle prices down, feed costs up. I've borrowed against the land again. Mary doesn't know how close we are to losing everything. Maybe I should tell her. Maybe I should have told her years ago. But what good would it do except make her worry? The entries from 1948 and 1949 continued in this vein. Failed crops, mounting debt, Harold taking odd jobs in town, working other men's ranches for day wages, while his own place suffered from neglect. The pride and optimism of the earlier years had been ground down by reality. I'm 50 years old, read an entry from 1950. Broke, tired, and running out of time. My daughter barely speaks to me anymore. She wants to leave, to go to college, to live anywhere but here. Can't say I blame her. I brought her to this God-forsaken place and gave her nothing but dust and disappointment. Sterling set the journal down, staring at the words. This wasn't the triumphant story he'd expected. Harold hadn't been a hero, hadn't conquered the land through sheer determination. He'd struggled, failed, suffered, just like everyone else, and yet he'd kept going. The entries continued past 1950, past the worst years, into 1951, when something finally shifted. A good year for cattle, a neighbor buying some land Harold couldn't use, enough money to pay down the debt, to buy that new truck, to feel like maybe things would work out after all. The last entry Sterling read that night was from May 1951. Paid off the bank today. This land is finally truly ours. 20 years it took. 20 years of breaking my back and my spirit. But we made it. The truck purrs like a kitten. Mary smiled at me today, really smiled, for the first time in months. Maybe everything we went through was worth it. As Sterling turned the page to continue, something fell out from between the leaves. A photograph, faded and creased but still clear enough. It showed Harold standing beside the truck, this truck gleaming and new, with a woman beside him who must have been Sterling's grandmother. And in front of them, maybe 7 years old, stood a young girl in a simple dress and braids. His mother. Sterling held the photo under the lamp, studying the faces. Harold looked tired, even in this moment of triumph. Deep lines around his eyes, his smile tentative, as if he wasn't quite sure he was allowed to be happy. The woman, Mary, looked worn down by hard years, but her hand rested on the young girl's shoulder with unmistakable tenderness. And his mother, Sterling barely recognized her. He'd only known her as an adult, stern, distant, someone who rarely smiled and never talked about her childhood. In this photo, she looked like any child, uncertain but hopeful, standing between her parents with the new truck behind them. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, "New truck, new start, 1951. Sterling turned the photo over several times front to back, studying both sides. What had happened between this moment and the woman his mother became? What broke the connection between Harold and his daughter so completely that she never spoke of him, never brought Sterling to visit, never seemed to carry anything but resentment for her childhood? The next morning, Sterling drove to town for supplies. He'd been avoiding the trip, making do with what he had, but certain parts couldn't be ordered online or fabricated from what lay around the ranch. He needed specific gaskets, specialty tools, materials he could only get from an auto parts store. The town was small. One main street, a few dozen businesses, most of them looking like they'd been there since Harold's time. The auto parts store occupied a building that might have once been a general store, brick facade and large windows displaying batteries and motor oil. Inside, an elderly man stood behind the counter reading a newspaper through thick glasses. He looked up as Sterling entered, studied him for a moment, then said, "You're staying at the old Wade place." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. "Yes, sir. I'm Sterling Wade. Harold was my grandfather." The man's face transformed, breaking into a smile that revealed several missing teeth. "Harold Wade's grandson? Well, I'll be damned. I'm Wendell Pierce. Your grandfather taught me half of what I know about engines." For the next 20 minutes, Wendell shared stories. How Harold had helped him fix his first car in 1958, spending an entire Saturday teaching him to rebuild a carburetor. How Harold never charged anyone for help, said knowledge should be passed on freely. How he'd keep broken parts from customer vehicles and use them to teach young people how things worked. "Never took a penny," Wendell said. "Always said a man's legacy wasn't what he owned, but what he taught others. I've tried to live by that myself." He gave Sterling a discount on the parts, refused to take full payment. "For Harold's grandson," he insisted. Some debts carry forward through generations. Driving back to the ranch, Sterling felt the weight of that statement. Some debts carry forward, but so did some burdens, some pain, some unresolved conflicts. His mother had carried something from her childhood that poisoned her entire relationship with her father. What was it? The poverty? The isolation? Something else Harold had done or failed to do? That evening, Ruth appeared at the door with fresh bread and vegetables from their garden. Sterling invited her in, made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table while the sun set beyond the windows. "You look troubled," Ruth said after a while. Sterling hadn't meant to open up, but something about her quiet presence made it easy. He showed her the photograph, told her about the journal entries, about the disconnect between Harold's struggles and the man people in town remembered fondly. Ruth studied the photo for a long time. "People are complicated," she finally said. "Harold was a good man, but that doesn't mean he was a good father. Sometimes the same qualities that make you succeed in one area make you fail in another. Stubbornness builds ranches but breaks relationships. You knew him? Some. Virgil knew him better. They worked together during haying season, shared equipment, helped each other through the hard times. Virgil says Harold had a temper, especially when he was younger. Pride too. Couldn't admit when he was wrong. Couldn't ask for help even when he desperately needed it." She handed the photo back. "Your mother left and never came back, didn't she?" "How did you know?" "It's not uncommon out here. Children grow up resenting the hardship, the isolation, the way their parents struggled. They leave and never look back. Can't say I blame them entirely. This life isn't for everyone." After Ruth left, Sterling sat alone with the photograph and the journal. He understood better now what he'd undertaken. Restoring the truck wasn't just about mechanics and parts. It was about understanding a man who'd been flawed and human, who'd built something lasting but couldn't hold on to what mattered most. His phone buzzed. A text from Holly. "Okay, looked at my schedule. I could come visit first weekend of next month. That work for you?" Sterling typed back immediately. "Yes, looking forward to it." He meant it. Maybe by the time she arrived he'd have the engine running. Maybe he could show her something he'd actually accomplished. Maybe they could start building something better than what he and his mother had, or what Harold and his mother had. Maybe it wasn't too late to break some of those cycles that carried forward through generations. Week 5 arrived with the first real snow. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to remind Sterling that winter was coming, and the barn had gaps in its walls that would make working there increasingly difficult. He spent a day patching the worst holes with scrap wood, not beautiful, but functional. The work distracted him from his nervousness about Holly's upcoming visit. He'd been pushing hard on the truck, determined to have something impressive to show her. The engine was fully disassembled now, each component cleaned and inspected. He'd found the cylinders in surprisingly good condition, the pistons serviceable with new rings. Every evening he studied parts diagrams, memorizing where each piece fit, preparing for the delicate work of reassembly. But he needed storage space for all the parts he was accumulating, and the barn's main floor was cluttered. He remembered seeing the loft access, a ladder built into the wall leading to the upper level. He'd avoided it so far, unsure if the old wood would hold his weight, but storage space was necessary. The ladder creaked under him but held. The loft was dark, lit only by dusty light filtering through gaps in the roof. He pulled out his phone, using its flashlight to survey the space. More forgotten items. Old blankets eaten through by mice, a wooden rocking horse with one runner broken, boxes of Christmas decorations that no one had opened in decades. And in the far corner, covered by a blanket, a metal ammunition box. Sterling worked his way across the creaking floorboards and pulled the blanket away. The box was military surplus, probably from World War II, olive drab with rust spots but still intact. A simple latch held it closed. He flipped it open. Inside, carefully bundled with twine, was a stack of letters, all in envelopes, all addressed to Harold Wade in neat feminine handwriting, all with return addresses in different cities: Denver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. The dates on the postmarks ranged from 1955 to 1985, 30 years of letters. Sterling lifted the bundle carefully. His hands shook as he untied the twine. What made him sick to his stomach was the realization every single envelope was unopened. He carried the box down the ladder, out of the barn, into the house where better light would let him examine them properly. Spreading them on the kitchen table, he sorted them by date. The earliest was postmarked March 1955. The return address showed his mother's name, her maiden name Wade, at an address in Denver. His mother had written to Harold for 30 years. And Harold had returned every letter unopened. Sterling sat staring at them, trying to understand what kind of man would do this. What kind of hurt or anger or pride would make someone refuse to even read their own daughter's letters for 3 decades? The moral weight of opening them pressed on him. These were private, meant for Harold's eyes only. They'd been rejected once. What right did Sterling have to violate that privacy now, years after everyone involved was dead? But they were also his only window into what had broken his family. The journal showed Harold's side, his struggles, his perspective. These letters would show his mother's. Together, they might finally explain the coldness that had defined her, the distance she'd kept from her past, the refusal to ever speak of her father except in tones of bitter resignation. Sterling sat with the decision for over an hour. Finally, he picked up the earliest letter. His hands trembled as he slid his finger under the flap. The glue had dried over the decades, and the envelope opened easily. The letter inside was written on lined paper in careful handwriting. "Dear Dad," it began, "I know you're angry about how I left. I know you think I abandoned you and Mom when you needed me, but I couldn't stay. You have to understand, I couldn't stay in that place one more day. It was killing something inside me. Every morning, waking up to empty fields and harder work and no future except more of the same. I had to leave, or I was going to disappear completely." Sterling read on, his mother's voice coming through across the decades. She wrote about her new life in Denver, about the office job she'd found, about the small apartment she shared with 2 other girls. She wrote about feeling guilty for leaving, but also feeling alive for the first time in years. She wrote about hoping Harold would understand, that someday they could talk again. "I love you, Dad," the letter ended. "I know you don't believe that right now, but I do. Please write back, please." He opened the second letter, dated 6 months later. The tone had shifted, less apologetic, more defensive. "I don't understand why you won't write back. Mom says you won't even talk about me, that you act like I never existed. What did I do that was so terrible? I didn't want to spend my life struggling on a ranch that barely feeds us. Is that a crime? Is wanting something better for myself such a betrayal?" The third letter from 1956 showed anger breaking through. "Fine, if you want to pretend I'm dead, go ahead. I'm building a life here. I met someone. We're talking about getting married. You won't be invited to the wedding because apparently I don't have a father anymore. Congratulations on disowning your only child over her wanting an education and a future." Sterling worked through them chronologically. Watching his mother's attempts at reconciliation turn to anger, then to bitter resignation. By the early 1960s, the letters came less frequently. By the 1970s, only once every few years. The final letter from 1985 was brief. "Dad, Mom told me you're sick. I'm asking one more time. Can we talk before it's too late? I have a son now, your grandson. He's 7 years old. His name is Sterling. Don't you want to meet him? I know we've hurt each other. I know there's so much anger between us. But doesn't family have to mean something? Please." That letter was returned unopened like all the others. Sterling set it down, his vision blurred with tears. He'd been 7 years old in 1985. Harold had died in 1987. His mother never mentioned trying to visit, never said anything about wanting him to know his grandfather. She'd reached out one final time and been rejected again, and after that, she'd closed that door completely. Now he understood her coldness. Not that it excused it. She'd done to Sterling what Harold had done to her, the same emotional distance, the same withholding of warmth. But he understood where it came from. Pain creates pain. Rejection teaches rejection. Ruth had said it. Some qualities that help you succeed make you fail elsewhere. Harold's pride, his stubbornness, his inability to forgive, these same traits that let him hold on to the ranch through impossible hardship, had cost him his daughter. And in losing his daughter, he'd lost his grandson too. Sterling gathered the letters carefully and put them back in the box. He couldn't undo what had happened, couldn't bridge a gap that had calcified over decades before he was even born. But maybe he could keep it from happening again. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Holly. "Really looking forward to your visit. Want to show you something I've been working on. Want to tell you some things too. About family. About not making the same mistakes." Her response came quickly. "You okay, Dad? That sounds kind of serious." "I'm okay. Better than I've been in years, actually. Just learning some things about my grandfather. About choices and consequences. I'll explain when you're here. Okay, 3 weeks. I'll be there." Sterling put the phone down and looked out the window toward the barn. The truck waited there, Harold's truck, a project of redemption that Harold had left unfinished. But Sterling could finish it, could learn from Harold's mistakes rather than repeat them. The letters had shown him something crucial. Harold had loved his daughter. The fact that he'd kept every letter, preserved them carefully in a weatherproof box, meant something. He couldn't bring himself to read them, couldn't overcome whatever pride or hurt kept him from responding, but he'd saved them. Some part of him had wanted to hold on to that connection, even while refusing to acknowledge it. It was such a human thing, such a tragic human thing. Sterling wouldn't make that mistake. When Holly came, he'd be honest with her. About his failures as a father, about the years he'd been absent while physically present, about wanting to do better. The truck would be part of that conversation, a physical representation of restoration, of taking something broken and making it whole again. But the real work wasn't mechanical. It was this: learning to reach out instead of withdraw, to forgive instead of hold grudges, to choose connection over pride. Harold had learned these lessons too late. Sterling still had time. The days before Holly's visit took on a frantic quality. Sterling worked longer hours, pushing through fatigue and cold fingers, determined to reach a milestone he could share with her. The engine reassembly had consumed the past 2 weeks, a methodical process of installing pistons, connecting rods, bearings, timing the camshaft, torquing every bolt to specification. He'd found Harold's repair manual tucked behind the sun visor, a small spiral notebook filled with mechanical notes, sketches of problems and solutions, observations from years of maintenance. The handwriting matched the journal, that same neat precision, but these notes were purely practical. No emotions, no reflections, just facts. "Timing adjusted Oct 1951. Runs smooth now," read one entry. Another noted, "Tried fixing starter 3 times before I understood the problem. Pride makes you blind. Ask for help sooner." That last line stayed with Sterling. Harold had learned humility through necessity, through failure, had written it down as a reminder to himself. But apparently that lesson hadn't extended to his personal relationships. where pride had kept him from reading his daughter's letters, from admitting mistakes, from seeking reconciliation. The engine was back together now, every gasket new, every seal replaced, fresh oil in the pan. Sterling had installed a rebuilt fuel pump, new plug wires, a battery charged and ready. In theory, it should run. In practice, dozens of things could go wrong after 70 years of sitting idle. Virgil had been checking in daily, offering advice, but respecting Sterling's need to do the work himself. On the morning before Holly's arrival, he appeared at the barn with a timing light and compression tester. "Thought you might need these," he said, "for final checks before you try starting her." They worked together for an hour, testing each cylinder's compression, checking spark timing, adjusting the carburetor mixture. Everything looked right. The numbers matched what the manual specified. "She should fire," Virgil said finally. "Might take a few tries. Might need some coaxing. But you've done the work right. How do you know Harold?" Sterling asked suddenly. "I mean, really know him, not just as a neighbor." Virgil leaned against the workbench, considering the question. "We grew up out here together, more or less. He was older than me by 15 years, but that don't matter so much in ranching country. We helped each other through hard times. Shared equipment, shared labor. He taught me things. What was he like? As a person?" "Complicated." Virgil chose the word carefully. "Good man in most ways. Would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But hard too. Set in his ways. Once he decided something, you couldn't move him with a bulldozer. That stubbornness kept this place going when any sensible person would have quit. But it cost him in other ways. His daughter. I figured you'd found out about that." Virgil nodded slowly. "She left right after high school. Never came back that I know of. Harold refused to talk about it. Just shut down whenever anyone mentioned her. His wife, your grandmother, she tried to bridge that gap, but Harold wouldn't budge. After she died, it was too late. He kept her letters," Sterling said. 30 years of them. Never opened a single one." Virgil was quiet for a long time. "That's about right for Harold," he said finally. "Loves something fierce, but can't show it proper. Can't bend even when bending would save what matters most. I don't want to be like that." "Then don't be. You got a choice he didn't think he had. Use it." After Virgil left, Sterling cleaned the house thoroughly. Holly would sleep in the upstairs bedroom. He'd bought a new mattress, new sheets, made the space as comfortable as he could. The bathroom now had actual towels, soap, things that made it feel less like an abandoned building and more like a home. That evening, he walked out to the barn one more time. The truck sat there, engine installed, everything connected, ready for its first attempt at life in decades. Sterling slid into the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of anticipation. "Tomorrow," he said to the truck, to Harold, to whoever might be listening. "Tomorrow we'll see if all this work meant something." Holly arrived late the following afternoon, her rental car pulling up the driveway just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Sterling met her on the porch, and for a moment they just looked at each other, father and daughter, years of distance between them, but trying at least to close that gap. "Hey, Dad," she smiled uncertainly. "Hey, sweetheart." He stepped forward and hugged her, and she hugged back, and it was awkward but genuine. She looked around at the property, the mountains, the endless sky. "Wow, it's really out here." That was kind of the point. "You look different," she said, studying his face. "Thinner." "More, I don't know. Present, maybe?" He laughed. "I feel present. For the first time in a long time." They spent the evening talking, really talking, in a way they hadn't in years. Sterling told her about the ranch, about Harold, about the journal and the letters. He showed her the photograph, and Holly stared at it for a long time. "That's Grandma? I never saw a picture of her when she was young. That's your grandmother as a child." "My mother." Holly's eyes widened. "Really? She looks so different." Not angry. She had reasons to be angry. "I'm starting to understand that." He told her everything then. The whole story of Harold and his daughter. The 30 years of silence, the mistakes that echoed through generations. Holly listened quietly, occasionally asking questions, and Sterling could see her making connections, understanding patterns in their own family. "Is that why you wanted me to visit?" she asked finally. To tell me this? Partly. But mostly because I wanted to see you. Because I've been a lousy father, and I want to try being a better one. Even if it's late. Even if I've already missed so much. Holly's eyes filled with tears. You weren't that lousy. I was present but absent. You said it yourself once. You asked if I even liked you and Mom. That question has haunted me for years. I was 17. I was being dramatic. You were being honest. And you were right. Sterling reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry, Holly, for all the years I wasn't really there. For letting work consume me. For checking out of my own life. She squeezed his hand, crying openly now. I'm sorry too. For pulling away. For making it hard to reach me. You learned that from me. That's the thing about these patterns. They pass down whether we mean them to or not. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands across the table, beginning the work of rebuilding something that had been broken for a long time. The next morning, Sterling took Holly to the barn. Her eyes widened when she saw the truck, the clean lines and original paint color showing through where he'd worked. That's it. That's Grandpa Harold's truck. That's it. Want to help me try to start it? They worked together, Sterling explaining each step, Holly learning fast and asking good questions. When everything was ready, fuel primed, choke set, battery connected, Sterling climbed into the driver's seat. Holly stood beside the open door, watching. Here goes nothing, he said, and turned the key. The engine cranked. Once, twice, 3 times. A cough, a sputter, then nothing. Try again, Holly encouraged. Sterling adjusted the choke and cranked again. This time the engine caught, coughed, nearly died, then suddenly roared to life. The sound filled the barn, deep, powerful, alive. Sterling's hands shook on the wheel as he adjusted the throttle, keeping it running. Holly whooped with joy, clapping her hands. Over the engine noise, Sterling heard Virgil's truck pulling up outside, the old rancher coming to witness the moment he'd known was approaching. The engine settled into a rough but steady idle. Sterling sat there, tears running down his face, while his daughter laughed with delight, and the truck that had sat silent for decades rumbled back to life. The engine's successful start changed something in Sterling. That night, lying in his sleeping bag while Holly slept upstairs, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The truck ran. His daughter was here, and they'd talked honestly, bridged some of the distance between them. Maybe restoration was actually possible. Not just of machines, but of relationships, of lives. They spent the next morning working on the truck together. Sterling showed Holly how to adjust the carburetor, how to check timing, how to listen to an engine and understand what it was telling you. She picked it up quickly, her hands steady and confident with tools. Watching her, he saw himself in her movements, but also saw Judith, his ex-wife's methodical approach to problems, her refusal to give up when something didn't work right away. You're good at this, he said. I guess it runs in the family, she grinned. Even if we didn't know that family did this kind of thing. They were testing the brakes when Sterling dropped a wrench. It rolled under the truck, back near the transmission. He got down on his back and slid underneath to retrieve it, flashlight in hand. That's when he saw it. The floorboard near the main support beam was different from the others. Newer wood, though still old. The nails holding it down didn't match the others. They were different, driven at odd angles, almost as if someone had pried the board up and replaced it. You okay down there? Holly called. Yeah, just hold on a second. Sterling retrieved the wrench, but couldn't stop looking at that board. Something about it bothered him. After they'd finished with the brakes and cleaned up for lunch, Sterling went back to the barn alone. He pried up the board carefully with a crowbar. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was another metal box. His heart hammered as he pulled it out. The oilcloth was brittle with age, but had done its job. The box inside was dry, protected. Sterling carried it into the house, set it on the kitchen table, and just stared at it for a long moment before opening the latch. Inside was another journal, same size as the first one, same leather binding, but this one had no name embossed on the cover. Sterling opened to the first page. 1951, it read in Harold's handwriting. I need to write truth somewhere. Sterling's stomach tightened. He flipped through the pages. They were all filled, entries spanning from 1951 to 1952, the year before Harold's wife died. These weren't the practical observations or struggles of the first journal. These were confessions. He started reading from the beginning. I've carried a secret for 9 years now. Mary doesn't know I know. Our daughter, the girl I've raised as mine, isn't mine by blood. Mary had an affair in 1942 while I was working the oil fields in Wyoming. Came back to find her pregnant, though we hadn't been together in 5 months. Sterling read the words 3 times, his mind refusing to process them. She told me it was mine, and I let her believe I believed her. What was I supposed to do? Leave her pregnant and alone? Abandon a child who'd done nothing wrong? So I stayed. I raised the girl. I loved her as best I could. But the knowing, it's there between us always. An invisible wall I can't tear down. The entries continued, chronicling Harold's internal struggle. He'd never told anyone, never confronted Mary, never treated the child differently outwardly. But the knowledge poisoned everything. Every time he looked at his daughter, he saw the betrayal. Every sacrifice he made for her reminded him she wasn't truly his. She's 12 now, read an entry from 1947. Smart as a whip. Looks like Mary, thank God. Nothing in her features to give away the truth. But I can't forget. When she asks why I'm so distant, why I don't show her affection like other fathers, I have no answer I can give her. How do I explain that I love her but can't fully love her? That she's my daughter but not my daughter? Sterling set the journal down, his hands shaking. His grandmother had had an affair. His mother wasn't Harold's biological daughter, which meant Sterling wasn't actually related to Harold by blood at all. The truck, the journal, the connection he'd felt, all of it based on a lie. He heard Holly coming down the stairs and quickly closed the journal, sliding it into his lap beneath the table. She appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from a shower. "Want to grab lunch in town?" she asked. "I'm starving." Sterling couldn't form words for a moment. Holly's smile faded. "Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He made a decision in that instant. She needed to know. This secret had already poisoned 2 generations. It wouldn't poison a third. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I found something else. Something Harold hid." He told her everything, showed her the journal, watched her face cycle through the same shock and confusion he'd felt. When he finished, they sat in silence for a long time. "So we're not actually related to him?" Holly finally said. "Not by blood, no." "Then why?" She gestured helplessly at the barn, the truck. "Why does any of this matter?" It was the question Sterling had been asking himself for the past 20 minutes. And suddenly, sitting across from his daughter in the house Harold had built, the answer became clear. "Because he chose to be our grandfather," Sterling said slowly. "He could have walked away. Could have left Mary and the baby. But he stayed. He raised my mother as his daughter, even knowing the truth. He built this place, this life, for a family that wasn't his by blood, but was his by choice." Holly stared at him. "But he couldn't love her." "Not really. That's what the journal says. He tried. That's what matters. He tried for 20 years, raised her, provided for her, never told her the truth that would have destroyed her. Maybe he couldn't show affection the way she needed, but he showed up. Every day. That counts for something. Does it?" Holly's voice was sharp. "Because it sounds like he did exactly what you did to me. Showed up physically but wasn't really present emotionally. And look how well that worked out." The words hit Sterling like a fist. She was right. He'd been doing the same thing Harold did, going through the motions of fatherhood while being fundamentally disconnected. The parallel was devastating. "You're right," he said quietly. "But that's why this matters. Harold couldn't fix what was broken in him. He tried, but the hurt was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. He let it poison his relationship with his daughter, and she left, and they never reconciled. And all that pain just multiplied, spread to the next generation, to Mom, to your grandmother. My mother, yes. She grew up feeling unloved, not understanding why her father was so cold. Then she did the same thing to me, kept me at emotional distance, never explained her past, never showed warmth. And I did it to you." Holly's eyes filled with tears. "So what's the point? We're all just doomed to repeat the same mistakes?" No! Sterling reached across the table and took her hand. The point is, we can choose differently. Harold chose to stay, to raise a child who wasn't his. That choice matters. It means family is more than blood. It's commitment, presence, showing up even when it's hard. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm choosing now, Holly, to be present. To do better than Harold did, better than my mother did. To actually show you I love you, instead of just going through the motions. It's late. I've already missed so much. But it's not too late. Holly wiped her eyes. The truck, it's not even really our family's truck. It is, though. Harold bought it, maintained it, left it here. He'd left everything here, the ranch, the journals, the letters. All of it says the same thing. I tried. I failed in some ways, but I tried. And maybe that's the real inheritance. Not the property or the truck or the blood connection. The inheritance is the lesson. Keep trying. Keep choosing family even when it's hard. Don't let pride or hurt or disappointment make you walk away from people who matter. They sat together in silence, processing the revelation and its implications. Finally, Holly spoke. I'm glad I came. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but I'm glad. So am I. What are we going to do now? Sterling thought about it. Finished restoring the truck, not because Harold was our biological grandfather, but because he chose to be our grandfather. That's worth honoring, worth completing. Together? Together. Holly nodded slowly. Okay, but Dad, we can't keep any more secrets. No more hidden journals or letters or buried truths. If we're going to break the cycle, we have to be honest. About everything. Deal. They ate lunch in town, after all, sitting in a small diner and talking about the revelation, about what family meant, about how to move forward. The shock faded gradually, replaced by a strange sense of liberation. The connection Sterling had felt to Harold didn't disappear, with the knowledge that they shared no blood. If anything, it deepened. Harold had made a choice every day for 20 years to be a father to someone else's child. That took a kind of courage Sterling was only beginning to understand. Holly stayed an extra 2 days beyond her planned visit. They worked on the truck together each morning, Sterling teaching her what he'd learned, Holly asking questions that made him think more deeply about what he was doing. In the afternoons, they walked the property, talking about everything and nothing, building the kind of easy companionship that had been missing from their relationship for years. On her last evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible, almost artificial in their beauty. I want to come back, Holly said. Next month. Help you finish this properly. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, you're going to need help with the bodywork and painting. That's not a one-person job. Sterling felt warmth spread through his chest. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. After Holly left, Sterling threw himself into the next phase of restoration with renewed purpose. The engine ran, but still needed tuning. The brakes required a complete rebuild. The electrical system was a maze of old wiring that needed systematic replacement. Each task was a puzzle, sometimes frustrating, always engaging. He called Holly every few days, updating her on progress, asking her advice on color choices and design decisions. She researched the truck's original specifications, found specialty. Suppliers for authentic parts helped him plan the final steps. Their conversations ranged beyond the truck, her work, his adjustment to ranch life, memories they were rediscovering, futures they were cautiously planning. Virgil continued his visits, bringing tools Sterling needed, offering guidance when asked, mostly just providing companionship. Ruth came by with food, checking that Sterling was eating properly, mothering him in ways his own mother never had. You're part of the community now, she said one afternoon over coffee. That's how it works out here. You show up, you put in the work, you become one of us. 6 weeks after Holly's first visit, Sterling began preparing for the painting phase. The truck's body needed attention, rust removal, dent repair, primer, then paint. He'd decided to restore it to its original turquoise color to honor Harold's choice, even if Harold wasn't technically his grandfather by blood. While removing the truck bed to access rust underneath, Sterling noticed something odd. The bed didn't sit quite flush with the frame on one side. Investigating closer, he found an envelope taped to the underside of the frame rail, protected by layers of plastic wrap. His hands shook as he peeled away the plastic. The envelope was yellowed but intact, and written across it in Harold's handwriting, "To whoever restores my truck." Sterling carried it inside, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. The same table, where he'd read the journals and letters and carefully opened it. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then I'm gone and you've done the work. Congratulations. Restoring a truck like this takes patience, persistence, and a stubborn refusal to give up when things don't go right the first time, or the second, or the 10th. Those are good qualities. I hope you carry them into the rest of your life." Sterling's eyes blurred with tears, but he kept reading. "I'm writing this in the summer of 1952. I'm dying, though I haven't told Mary yet. Heart disease, the doctor says. Could be months, could be years, but it's coming. I'm 52 years old, and I'm trying to figure out what I've built with my time here. The ranch will survive me. I've made sure of that. The land is paid for, the house is solid, the barn will stand for decades more if someone maintains it. But property isn't legacy, it's just stuff. My real legacy is the relationships I've failed to maintain. My wife, who I never fully forgave for a mistake she made 10 years ago. My daughter, who I've loved but couldn't show that love properly because of pride and hurt and stupid stubbornness. I know I've damaged her. I see it in her eyes, the way she pulls away from me, the way she can't wait to leave this place. I've made her feel unloved, and that's a wound that might never heal. So I'm leaving this truck here, covered but intact, as a test and a gift. A test because restoring it will take real work, real commitment. You'll have to want it badly enough to push through all the difficulties. And a gift because if you do that work, you'll learn something I learned too late. That broken things can be fixed if you're willing to put in the time. That includes relationships. That includes yourself. Sterling set the letter down for a moment, overwhelmed. Harold had planned this, had known someone would find the truck eventually, had left it specifically as a message. He picked up the letter again. "I need to confess something that weighs on me. My daughter isn't mine by blood. Her mother had an affair, got pregnant, and I chose to raise the child as my own. That was the right choice, the only choice I could live with, but I couldn't fully let go of the hurt. It created a wall between us that I couldn't tear down, no matter how much I wanted to. I'm writing this down so that whoever finds this truck understands. Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing to love even when it's hard. I showed up every day for 20 years, but I failed at the loving part. Don't make my mistake. If you have people in your life who matter, tell them, show them. Don't let pride or hurt or old wounds keep you from connecting with them. If you've restored this truck, you've proven you can be patient. You can work through problems. You can take something broken and make it whole. Apply those same skills to your relationships. They need restoration too, and unlike a truck, you can't just replace the broken parts. You have to repair them carefully, patiently, with skill and commitment. Ichi, one more thing. I'm proud of this truck. I'm proud of this ranch. I'm proud that I built something that lasted. But my biggest regret is that I didn't build a relationship with my daughter that could last. She's going to leave soon, and we'll never have the chance to fix what's broken between us. That's on me. Don't let that happen to you." The letter was signed. Harold Wade, proud builder of this ranch and this truck, failed father but still trying. Sterling read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Harold had understood everything, had known exactly what he was doing wrong but couldn't overcome it. And rather than let that wisdom die with him, he'd left it hidden in the truck for someone else to find. Sterling pulled out his phone and called Holly. "Dad, what's wrong?" "It's late. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I found another letter from Harold. He left it specifically for whoever restored the truck. Holly, he knew. He understood everything. He just couldn't fix it in his own life, so he left instructions for someone else. What did it say? Sterling read her the entire letter, his voice breaking in places. When he finished, Holly was crying too. He was trying, she said. Even at the end, he was trying to fix things. That's what matters. That he tried, that he left this message, that he wanted better for whoever came after him. When can I come back? Holly asked. I need to be there for the painting. I need to help you finish this. Next weekend. I'll be there Friday evening. After they hung up, Sterling sat with the letter for a long time. Harold had given them, a gift more valuable than property or vehicles. He'd given them a warning, a lesson learned through painful experience. Don't wait to fix what matters. Don't let pride or hurt or stubbornness destroy the relationships that make life worth living. Sterling thought about all the years he'd wasted being physically present but emotionally absent. All the moments with Holly he'd missed because he was buried in work or locked in his own head. All the damage that had accumulated because he'd been following the same pattern Harold had followed, the same pattern his mother had followed. But patterns could be broken, wounds could be healed. Restoration was possible. He looked out the window toward the barn where the truck waited. Tomorrow he'd start preparing for the paintwork, and when Holly arrived, they'd finish it together. Not just the truck, but the work of rebuilding their relationship, of creating something that would last beyond rust and metal and time. Friday evening arrived cold and clear, the kind of October night that promised frost by morning. Sterling stood on the porch watching Holly's headlights come up the driveway, and when she stepped out of the car, he saw something different in her face. Not just the smile, though that was genuine and warm. Something deeper, an ease, a lightness, as if some burden she'd been carrying had finally lifted. They hugged, and this time there was no awkwardness, no careful distance. Just a father and daughter glad to see each other. I brought supplies, Holly said, popping the trunk. Inside were professional painting supplies, spray equipment, respirators, tack cloths, more expensive than Sterling would have bought. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. They spent Saturday preparing. The truck's body had been stripped, primed, every surface sanded smooth. Sterling had watched hours of tutorials, practiced on scrap metal, but his hands still shook with nervousness as they set up the makeshift spray booth in the barn. You've got this, Holly said, watching him pace. You've rebuilt the entire engine from scratch. Paint is just the final step. Paint is what everyone sees. Engine problems you can fix. Bad paint job lives forever. Then we'll make sure it's not a bad paint job. Virgil arrived Sunday morning with Ruth, and to Sterling's surprise, several other neighbors followed. Wendell from the auto parts store, his son carrying extra lighting equipment, a younger couple from down the road Sterling had met once at the hardware store, an elderly woman who'd apparently been friends with Harold's wife decades ago. Word. Got around you were finishing Harold's truck today, Virgil explained. Folks wanted to witness it. Sterling felt overwhelmed. I didn't expect. That's how it works here, Ruth said gently. Something important happens. The community shows up. This truck matters, not just to you. They set up lawn chairs outside. The barn brought coffee and pastries, created an impromptu gathering. Holly stood beside Sterling, helping him mix the paint to the exact shade, that vintage turquoise that had caught light 70 years ago when Harold first drove the truck home. Ready? She asked. Sterling nodded, pulling on his respirator. They decided he would do the spraying, his project, his accomplishment, while Holly assisted, managing the equipment, keeping everything organized. The first pass went on smooth, the color transforming gray primer into something alive. Sterling moved methodically, the way he'd practiced, overlapping each pass, maintaining consistent distance and speed. His hands steadied once he started. Muscle memory took over, and the nervousness faded into focus. Holly handed him fresh equipment for the second coat. The color deepened, the finish becoming glossy and rich. Watching it emerge, Sterling felt something shift inside him. This truck had been abandoned, forgotten, left to decay. Now it gleamed under the barn lights, beautiful and whole. Between coats, while paint dried, the gathered neighbors shared stories about Harold. The elderly woman, her name was Iris, remembered when he'd bought the truck new. "Drove it past our place that first day," she said, grinning ear to ear. Hadn't seen Harold smile like that in years. Those were hard times, but that truck represented hope, a fresh start after everything they'd been through. Wendell added, he maintained that truck perfect. Every Saturday, he'd be out here checking everything, keeping it running smooth. Said a man should take care of what he owns, show respect for the tools that serve him. "He ever talk about his daughter?" Sterling asked, unable to help himself. The group went quiet. Finally, Virgil spoke. "Not after she left. Before that, sometimes. You could tell he loved her, but something was broken between them. We all saw it, but nobody knew how to help. Harold wasn't the type to accept help with personal matters. He left letters," Sterling said quietly. "For me. For whoever found the truck, explaining things, trying to teach lessons he'd learned too late." "That sounds like Harold," Iris said. "Always thinking ahead, always trying to build something that would last beyond himself." The final coat went on perfectly. As Sterling stepped back, removing his respirator, the truck sat there gleaming, turquoise and chrome and restored beauty. Holly threw her arms around him, and the neighbors applauded. "Your grandfather would be proud," Virgil said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is good work, Sterling, really good work." They spent the afternoon letting the paint cure while the neighbors lingered, the gathering becoming a celebration. Someone brought food. Someone else brought beer. The barn filled with laughter and conversation, and Sterling found himself at the center of it, no longer the outsider from Chicago, but one of them, the man who'd restored Harold Wade's truck. As evening approached and people began leaving, Virgil pulled Sterling aside. "You've changed since you arrived," he said. "First time I met you, I wasn't sure you'd last a month. Thought you were another city person running away from problems instead of facing them. Maybe I was. Maybe you were. But you didn't just run. You built something here, fixed something. That matters." After everyone left, Sterling and Holly sat in the barn looking at the truck. The paint had cured to a mirror finish. The color... Exactly right, the truck looking like it could have rolled off the showroom floor in 1951. "We did it," Holly said softly. "We did it," Sterling agreed, but they both knew the truck was only part of what they'd restored. The week after the painting, Sterling and Holly worked on the final details. The interior needed attention. The bench seat reupholstered in fabric that matched the original pattern, ordered from a specialty supplier in Kansas. Dashboard components cleaned and restored. Chrome polished until it reflected like mirrors. Every small piece mattered now that the truck looked showroom perfect on the outside. Holly had taken additional time off work, saying she'd deal with the consequences later. "Some things are more important than my job," she'd told her boss. Now she sat cross-legged on the barn floor, carefully stitching the new upholstery onto the bench seat frame, while Sterling worked on the last electrical connections. "Tell me about Mom," Holly said suddenly. "I mean, really tell me. Not the angry version or the distant version. Who was she before all that?" Sterling set down his tools and thought carefully. "I don't know if I ever knew her before that. She was already distant when I was a kid. Always working, always busy, never affectionate. I thought that was just how mothers were until I'd go to friends' houses and see their moms actually hugging them, talking to them like they mattered. Did you ever ask her why? Once, when I was maybe 15, she just said some people aren't huggers. That I should be grateful she put food on the table and kept a roof over my head." Sterling paused. Now I understand she was repeating the only parenting she knew. Harold kept her fed and housed, but couldn't show love. "So she did the same to me. And you did the same to me," Holly said quietly. "Yes, until I came here and found all this." He gestured at the barn, the truck, everything, and realized the pattern had to stop. They installed the restored seat together, bolting it into place. Sterling sat in it first, then Holly slid in beside him. The bench was wide enough that they had room, but close enough that their shoulders touched. Sterling put his hands on the wheel, and Holly rested hers on the dashboard. "Harold sat here," she said, "with his wife, with your mom when she was little, and now we're sitting here, 3 generations later, finally understanding what he couldn't." The next morning, Sterling decided the truck was ready for a real test. They'd driven it around the property several times, checking systems, making adjustments. Now it needed a proper road test. Virgil showed up as they were preparing to leave, as if he'd sensed the moment. "First real drive?" he asked. "First real drive," Sterling confirmed. "Mind if I ride along?" They made room, Virgil climbing in beside Holly. Sterling started the engine. It caught immediately now, purring smooth and strong. He put it in gear, and they rolled down the driveway onto the main road. The truck handled beautifully. Steering precise, brakes firm, engine responsive. Sterling kept it moderate at first, then gradually increased speed. At 50 miles per hour on the empty Montana highway, the truck ran smooth as silk. Holly leaned out the window, wind in her hair, laughing. "This is amazing!" They drove for an hour through countryside that had changed remarkably little since 1951, past ranches and farms, through small towns where people waved at the vintage truck, along roads that Harold had surely driven countless times. When they pulled back into the ranch, Sterling felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. The truck wasn't just restored, it was alive again, functional, ready to be driven for decades more. That evening, over dinner Ruth had brought, they made plans. "I've been thinking," Sterling said. "Harold came from Oklahoma, left during the Dust Bowl, never went back. But his story started there. I think we should take the truck there. See where he came from. A road trip?" Holly's eyes lit up. "Seriously? Why not? The truck's ready. You said you could take more time off. I've got nothing but time. We could drive down, see his hometown, understand the whole story." "I love it," Holly said. "When? 2 weeks. Gives me time to do final checks. You time to arrange things at work." Holly pulled out her phone immediately, checking her calendar. "I'll make it work." "This is too important to miss." Virgil smiled from across the table. "Harold would like that. Taking his truck home, in a way. Completing the circle." "It feels right," Sterling agreed. "Like it's what the truck was meant for. Not just to sit in a barn, but to be driven. To carry family on journeys." After dinner, Sterling and Holly walked out to the barn one more time. The truck gleamed under the overhead lights. Turquoise paint perfect, chrome brilliant, every detail exactly as it should be. "We actually did it," Holly said, running her hand along the fender. "Took something abandoned and broken and made it beautiful again. We did." Sterling put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, natural, easy, the way fathers and daughters should be able to stand together. "But the truck was the easy part." "What do you mean? Fixing us was harder. Still is, in some ways. But we're doing it." Holly hugged him tight. "Yeah, Dad, we are." They stood there together, father and daughter, looking at the restored truck that had brought them to this moment. Outside, Montana stretched endlessly under stars, and the road to Oklahoma waited, and everything broken had finally been made whole. The drive to Oklahoma took 3 days. They camped along the way, the truck's bed loaded with gear, taking back roads through country that time seemed to have forgotten. Sterling drove most of the time, but Holly took her turns behind the wheel, getting a feel for the truck's personality, the way it pulled slightly left, the particular rhythm of the clutch, the sweet spot in the throttle where the engine sang. They talked more on that journey than they had in years, about everything and nothing. Holly told him about relationships that hadn't worked out, career doubts she'd been carrying, dreams she'd been afraid to pursue. Sterling shared stories from his own life he'd never thought to tell, small moments that mattered, regrets he'd accumulated, hopes he was only now learning to articulate. The Oklahoma panhandle was flat and windswept, the kind of landscape that either called to your soul or made you want to keep driving until you found trees and hills. They reached the small town, population 800, barely larger than when Harold had left 90 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when the main street was almost empty. The woman at the Historical Society Museum recognized Harold's name immediately. "Wade family," she said, pulling out a binder of old photographs and records. "One of the original settler families. They had a farm about 10 miles north of here. Lost it in the Dust Bowl, like so many others. She showed them photographs from the 1930s, dust storms turning day into night. Families loading possessions onto trucks heading west. Among them, a young couple Sterling recognized from the photograph he'd found in Harold's journal, his grandfather and grandmother, decades younger, eyes full of determination and fear. "There's a memorial in the town square," the woman said. "Names of all the families who left during those years. The Wades are on it." They found the memorial, a simple stone marker listing dozens of names. Harold Wade, Mary Wade, each name representing a family torn from their roots, forced to start over somewhere else. Sterling traced his fingers over Harold's name. Beside him, Holly did the same. "He was so young," she said quietly. 23 when he left everything behind. That's younger than me. And he rebuilt from nothing, created a whole new life in Montana, made something that lasted, because he had to. What choice did he have? We always have choices. Sterling looked at his daughter. Harold chose to stay when he learned the truth about your grandmother's affair. He chose to raise a daughter who wasn't his by blood. He chose to hold onto the ranch through impossible hardships. They weren't always the right choices, especially with his daughter. But he kept choosing, kept trying, kept showing up. They drove out to where the Wade farm had been. The land was wheat fields now, owned by someone else, no trace remaining of the original homestead. But standing there in the wind, Sterling felt a connection to Harold he couldn't quite explain. This was where the story had started, where a young man had lost everything and decided to build it all back somewhere else. The drive home was quieter, more reflective. They took their time, stopping at small museums and roadside attractions, eating at diners that served food exactly as it had been served in Harold's time. The truck ran perfectly, never missing a beat, carrying them north with the steady reliability of something built to last. When they pulled back into the ranch driveway, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in gold. Virgil and Ruth stood on their own porch next door, waving. Sterling honked the horn, that original horn that still worked after 70 years, and they waved back. "Home," Holly said softly. "Yeah," Sterling agreed. "Home." That evening they sat on the porch drinking coffee, watching stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The truck rested in the barn, cleaned and cared for, ready for its next journey. "I've been thinking," Holly said. "About my job, about Seattle, about what I want." Sterling waited, not pushing. "I think I want to move closer. Not here, I need a city of some kind. But maybe Montana, Missoula or Bozeman, somewhere I can visit more easily. Be around more." Sterling's heart lifted. "I'd like that, a lot. And I was thinking, maybe we could do more trips in the truck. Make it a regular thing, not just Oklahoma, wherever the road takes us." I think Harold would like that. The truck being used, being driven, carrying family on adventures. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Holly said, "Do you think we've fixed it? Us, I mean, really fixed it?" Sterling considered the question carefully. "I think we're fixing it. It's not a one-time restoration like the truck. It's ongoing maintenance, showing up, staying present, choosing each other. But yeah, I think we're on the right path." "Good." Holly leaned her head on his shoulder. "Because I'm not losing you again. I lost too many years already. You won't lose me. I promise. I'm here now. Really here." 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of new grass and possibility, Sterling stood in the barn, looking at the truck. Holly was moving to Missoula that weekend, and they'd planned a trip to help her settle in. The truck would carry her belongings. She'd insisted on it, said it was good luck, said Harold's truck should help her start this new chapter. Sterling ran his hand along the fender, feeling the smooth paint, the solid metal underneath. The truck had been his salvation, his teacher, his connection to a man he'd never met, but now felt he understood. Harold had tried to build something lasting and had succeeded with the ranch, but failed with his family. Sterling was determined to succeed at both. He pulled out the small leather journal he'd started keeping, his own version of Harold's journals, documenting not just the truck's maintenance, but his own journey, lessons learned, advice for whoever might read it someday. "Started a new chapter today," he wrote. Holly moving closer. The distance between us almost closed now. The truck runs perfect. The ranch feels like home. I'm building something that will last, not just property but relationships, family, love, the things that actually matter. He set the pen down and looked around the barn. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes, making everything glow. The truck sat there patiently, ready for whatever came next. Sterling heard Holly's car coming up the driveway. She was early, excited about the move, about the future they were building together. He walked out to meet her, and when she stepped out of the car, smiling, happy, present, he felt complete. They'd taken something broken and made it whole. Not just the truck, themselves, each other. The family line that had been fractured for generations. Harold had left him more than a truck. He'd left him a lesson. It's never too late to restore what matters. Never too late to choose love over pride, connection over isolation, hope over resignation. Sterling had learned that lesson, and he would spend the rest of his life living it.